The morning started like any other at Windsor Castle. Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his red tunic and checked his rifle one last time, before taking his position at the main gate. At 28 years old, James had been serving as a Queen's Guard for 5 years, and he took immense pride in his duty to protect the royal family. The weather forecast had mentioned possible showers, but James wasn't worried. He had stood through worse conditions during his training and previous postings. What he didn't know was that this particular day would test his endurance in ways he never expected, and ultimately lead to an encounter that would warm his heart for years to come. As James marched to his designated spot outside the castle's main entrance, he could see dark clouds gathering in the distance. The autumn air carried a crisp chill and the wind was picking up slightly. Other guards were taking their positions around the grounds, their movements precise and disciplined as always. James positioned himself perfectly straight, his feet planted firmly on the cobblestones. His famous bearskin hat sat tall on his head, and his uniform was immaculate. Tourists were already beginning to gather, cameras ready to capture photos with the stoic guards who had become symbols of British tradition. The first drops of rain began falling around 10 in the morning. They were light at first, barely noticeable on James's thick uniform. He remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead as he had been trained to do. The rain was just another element to endure, no different from the scorching summer heat or bitter winter cold he had faced before. As the minutes ticked by, the gentle drizzle began to intensify. The tourists started opening umbrellas and seeking shelter under nearby archways, but James continued to stand motionless. His job was to remain at his post regardless of weather conditions, and he took that responsibility seriously. The rain began to soak through his uniform, but James showed no sign of discomfort. His face remained expressionless, his eyes fixed on the horizon. This was what he had trained for, what he had committed to when he joined the Queen's Guard. No matter how uncomfortable he became, abandoning his post was not an option. By noon, the rain had transformed from a light shower into a steady downpour. Water dripped from the brim of his bearskin hat and ran down his face, but James didn't move a muscle. His uniform was now completely soaked, and he could feel the cold water seeping through to his skin underneath. The tourists had mostly disappeared, seeking warm, dry places to wait out the storm. Only a few dedicated royal watchers remained, huddled under umbrellas and awnings, amazed by the guards' unwavering dedication. Some took photos of James standing resolute in the pouring rain, impressed by his commitment to duty. As the afternoon wore on, the rain showed no signs of stopping. In fact, it seemed to be getting heavier. James could feel his boots filling with water, and his thick wool uniform had become a heavy, waterlogged burden. Yet he remained perfectly still, a testament to the discipline and dedication that defined the Queen's Guard. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the rain had become torrential. James had been standing in the downpour for over 4 hours, and his entire body was drenched. Water pooled around his feet, and he could feel it squishing in his boots with every subtle shift of weight. His woolen uniform, designed to protect against many weather conditions, had reached its limit and was now completely saturated. Despite his discomfort, James maintained his rigid posture. His training had prepared him for this. During his time at the military academy, he had learned to endure extreme conditions without breaking formation. The instructors had repeatedly emphasized that a guard's duty came before personal comfort, and James had internalized this lesson completely. The few remaining tourists watched in amazement and concern. Some approached the castle staff to ask if someone should help the guard, but they were politely informed that the guards were trained professionals who knew how to handle such situations. The staff explained that interfering with a guard's duty would be inappropriate, and that James would be relieved at the proper time. Inside the castle, word was spreading about the guard standing steadfast in the terrible weather. Castle employees glanced out windows, impressed by James's dedication but also concerned about his well-being. The rain was unlike anything they had seen in months, and it showed no signs of letting up. James could feel the cold seeping deep into his bones now. His hands, gripping his rifle, had gone numb hours ago. Water streamed continuously from his hat and uniform, creating small rivers around his feet. Every piece of fabric on his body was completely soaked through, making his uniform incredibly heavy and uncomfortable. The wind had picked up significantly, driving the rain sideways and making the conditions even more challenging. James had to fight against the gusts to maintain his perfect posture, but he never wavered. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, his expression unchanged even as water ran down his face in steady streams. Around 3 o'clock, some of the castle's senior staff began discussing whether they should intervene. The weather had become so severe that they worried about the guards' health and safety. However, they knew that breaking protocol would require authorization from higher authorities, and any decision would need to be made carefully. Meanwhile, James continued his vigil. He had lost feeling in his feet completely, and his fingers were so numb he wasn't sure he could move them if required. But his mind remained focused on his duty. He thought about the oath he had taken, the trust placed in him, and the generations of guards who had stood in similar conditions before him. The rain began to form puddles so large that they resembled small lakes around the castle grounds. James stood in the center of what had become a significant pool of water, but his position never changed. Visitors who braved the weather to catch a glimpse of the changing of the guard were amazed to see him still there, unwavering despite the absolutely miserable conditions. As the 4th hour of continuous rainfall passed, even the most dedicated tourist had given up and sought shelter. The castle grounds were virtually empty, except for James and a few other guards at their respective posts. The silence was broken only by the sound of heavy rain hitting stone and the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, the rainfall had become a true deluge. James had now been standing in the pouring rain for nearly 5 hours, and the conditions were testing even his exceptional training and dedication. The water around his feet had risen to ankle level, and his uniform had become so waterlogged that it felt like he was wearing a suit of liquid lead. His body was beginning to show subtle signs of the strain, though his face remained impassive. A slight tremor had developed in his hands, barely visible but present nonetheless. His breathing had become slightly more labored as his body worked to maintain its core temperature against the relentless cold and wet. Inside Windsor Castle, Princess Charlotte was finishing her afternoon lessons with her private tutor. The 9-year-old princess had been watching the storm through the large windows of the schoolroom, fascinated by the intensity of the rain. Her tutor had commented on how unusual the weather was for the season, and Charlotte found herself thinking about everyone who had to be outside in such conditions. During a break between lessons, Charlotte wandered to one of the windows that overlooked the main courtyard. She could see the lone figure of the guard standing motionless in the rain, water streaming off his uniform and hat. The sight immediately caught her attention, and she pressed her face against the glass to get a better look. The young princess was struck by the guard's dedication. She had grown up around the Queen's Guard and understood their important role, but she had never seen one endure such extreme weather conditions for so long. Her natural empathy, nurtured by her parents' emphasis on kindness and consideration for others, made her feel genuinely concerned for the guard's well-being. Charlotte asked her tutor why the guard had to stand in such terrible weather. The tutor explained the tradition and duty of the Queen's Guard, emphasizing their commitment to protecting the royal family, regardless of conditions. While Charlotte understood the importance of duty, her young heart was troubled by the thought of someone suffering in the rain for so long. Meanwhile, James was drawing on every ounce of his training and mental fortitude. His feet had gone completely numb, and he could no longer feel the ground beneath his boots. The constant weight of his soaked uniform was putting tremendous strain on his back and shoulders. Yet his military discipline held firm, and he continued to stand perfectly erect. The rain had created such poor visibility that the distant parts of the castle grounds were barely visible through the sheets of water falling from the sky. The few staff members who ventured outside moved quickly from building to building, hunched over and rushing to minimize their exposure to the elements. As 6 o'clock approached, James had been in position for 8 hours, with the last 5 being in continuous heavy rainfall. His lips had taken on a slight blue tinge and his entire body was shivering almost imperceptibly. Still, he maintained his post with the same steadfast determination that had carried him through his military training and service. Princess Charlotte finished her lessons but found herself repeatedly returning to the window to check on the guard. Each time she looked, there he was, still standing in the same position despite the worsening conditions. Her concern grew with each passing hour, and she began to formulate a plan that would soon demonstrate the kindness and compassion that were becoming hallmarks of her young character. Princess Charlotte couldn't stop thinking about the guard standing in the rain. After her lessons concluded, she approached her personal protection officer who was stationed nearby. With the innocent directness that children possess, she asked why no one was helping the man who had been standing in the terrible weather for so many hours. The protection officer gently explained the protocols and traditions surrounding the Queen's Guard, but Charlotte's young mind focused on the human element rather than the ceremonial aspects. She understood duty and tradition, but she also understood compassion, and in her view, showing kindness didn't have to interfere with either. Without telling anyone of her intentions, Charlotte quietly made her way to the castle's storage area, where various household items were kept. She searched through closets and cupboards until she found what she was looking for: a large, sturdy black umbrella that would provide substantial coverage from the rain. The young princess then began what would become a carefully planned mission of mercy. She knew she couldn't simply walk outside unaccompanied, as her security detail would never allow it. Instead, she would need to convince the right people to help her carry out her compassionate plan. Charlotte first approached Maria Santos, one of the castle's housekeeping staff who had always been kind to her. Maria was preparing to brave the rain to move between buildings when Charlotte intercepted her with an unusual request. The princess asked if Maria would be willing to take an umbrella to the guard who had been standing outside all day. Maria was initially hesitant, unsure if such an action would be appropriate, given the strict protocols surrounding the Queen's Guard. However, Charlotte's earnest explanation about wanting to help someone who was clearly suffering in the rain touched Maria's heart. The housekeeper agreed to consider the request, but wanted to check with her supervisors first. While Maria consulted with other staff members, Charlotte remained by the window, watching James continue his steadfast vigil. The rain had not lessened at all, and if anything, seemed to be intensifying as the evening approached. The sight of the guard standing alone in the downpour strengthened Charlotte's resolve to help in whatever way she could. James, meanwhile, had entered what felt like a trance-like state. His body had adapted to the extreme conditions as much as possible, though he was operating at the very limits of human endurance. His training in mental resilience was serving him well, but the physical toll was becoming increasingly apparent. The word of Princess Charlotte's request began to spread quietly among the castle staff. Many were moved by the young royal's compassion and desire to help the guard, but they were also concerned about breaking protocol. Some staff members approached senior officials to ask for guidance on how to handle the unusual situation. After what seemed like an eternity of deliberation, the senior staff reached a decision. They recognized that Princess Charlotte's gesture came from a place of genuine kindness, and that denying her request might send the wrong message about compassion and human decency. They also realized that providing some protection from the elements wouldn't compromise the guard's duty or position. The decision was made to allow Princess Charlotte's plan to proceed, but with proper supervision and security measures in place. Her protection officer would accompany her outside, and the interaction would be brief and conducted in a way that respected both the guard's duty and the safety protocols that governed the young princess's movements. Charlotte was overjoyed when she learned that her request had been approved. She carefully selected the largest, most protective umbrella she could find and prepared for what would become a moment of kindness that would be remembered and cherished for years to come. At exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, Princess Charlotte emerged from Windsor Castle accompanied by her protection officer. She carried the large black umbrella with both hands, determined to provide relief to the guard who had been standing in the rain for what was now approaching 6 hours of continuous downpour. The sight that greeted Charlotte outside was even more dramatic than what she had observed from the window. The rain was falling with such intensity that it created a constant roar against the stone surfaces of the castle. James stood like a statue in the center of what had become a substantial pool of water, his uniform completely soaked and his face pale from the cold and exposure. As Charlotte approached, she could see the full extent of the guard's dedication and suffering. Water streamed continuously from every part of his uniform, and she could see the slight tremor in his hands despite his efforts to remain perfectly still. The sight strengthened her resolve to provide whatever comfort she could within the constraints of royal protocol. The young princess positioned herself carefully next to James, holding the umbrella high above both their heads. For the first time in hours, James felt the relief of being protected from the direct assault of the rain. Though he couldn't acknowledge Charlotte's presence with words or movement due to his duty requirements, his eyes briefly flickered with gratitude and surprise. Charlotte stood silently beside the guard, holding the umbrella as steadily as her small arms would allow. The protection officer positioned himself nearby, ensuring the princess's safety while respecting the solemnity of the moment. The scene was both touching and powerful. A young member of the royal family showing simple human kindness to someone dedicated to protecting her and her family. The rain continued to pour around them, but under Charlotte's umbrella, both she and James found respite from the worst of the storm. The princess had to stretch to keep the umbrella positioned properly over the much taller guard, but she was determined to maintain her position for as long as possible. Word of Charlotte's compassionate act spread quickly through the castle. Staff members who could safely observe from windows watched with admiration as the young princess stood steadfastly beside the guard, providing him with the protection from the elements that protocol hadn't allowed others to offer. After several minutes of shared shelter, Charlotte's protection officer gently indicated that they needed to return inside for safety reasons. The princess understood but was reluctant to leave the guard to face the rain alone again. Before departing, she carefully positioned the umbrella so that James could continue to benefit from its protection even after she left. As Charlotte prepared to return to the castle, she looked up at James with genuine concern in her young eyes. Though she couldn't speak to him directly due to protocol, her expression conveyed her hope that her small gesture had provided some comfort. She then placed the umbrella handle in a position where James could potentially hold it if needed, while still maintaining his official stance. The interaction lasted only about 10 minutes, but its impact was profound. James felt a warmth in his heart that had nothing to do with physical comfort. The young princess's act of kindness reminded him why his service was meaningful and gave him the emotional strength to continue his duty despite the harsh conditions. Charlotte returned to the castle with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had done something positive for someone who was suffering. Her simple act of compassion had created a moment of human connection that transcended the formal boundaries of royal protocol and military duty. With Princess Charlotte's umbrella positioned above him, James found the final hours of his duty shift much more bearable. The simple black umbrella provided crucial protection from the relentless rain that had been beating down on him for over 6 hours. Though he still couldn't move from his position or acknowledge the gift directly, the gesture had lifted his spirits immeasurably. The umbrella remained in place as James continued his watch, a visible symbol of the unexpected kindness he had received. Castle staff members who passed by were moved by the sight of the umbrella standing as a testament to Princess Charlotte's compassionate nature. Many took photos from a respectful distance, recognizing they were witnessing something special. As 8 o'clock approached, James knew his relief would arrive soon. His replacement guard appeared on schedule, marching with the same precision and dedication that James had maintained throughout his long, wet vigil. The changing of the guard proceeded according to protocol, with James finally able to step away from his post after nearly 7 hours in the pouring rain. Before leaving his position, James carefully retrieved Princess Charlotte's umbrella. Though protocol typically prevented guards from acknowledging gifts or interactions during their duty, the exceptional circumstances and the princess's genuine kindness warranted special consideration. James made sure the umbrella would be properly returned to its young owner. As James walked toward the guard quarters, his waterlogged boots squelching with each step, he reflected on the day's events. The physical challenges had been severe, perhaps the most demanding he had ever faced during his service. Yet Princess Charlotte's act of kindness had transformed what could have been merely an ordeal into something meaningful and memorable. In the castle, news of Charlotte's compassionate gesture had reached her parents, who were proud but not surprised by their daughter's thoughtful actions. The princess had demonstrated the values they had worked to instill in her: empathy, kindness, and a genuine concern for others regardless of their position or status. The story of Princess Charlotte and the umbrella quickly spread beyond the castle walls. Staff members shared the tale with friends and family, and soon the heartwarming story was being discussed throughout the local community. People were moved by the image of a young princess standing in the rain to help someone who was serving her family. James spent the evening in dry clothes, warming up and recovering from his extended exposure to the elements. He made sure Princess Charlotte's umbrella was cleaned and properly prepared for return. Though he might never have the opportunity to thank her directly, he would never forget her kindness and the way it had sustained him through one of the most challenging days of his service. The following day, the umbrella was formally returned to Princess Charlotte with a note expressing the gratitude of the guard unit for her thoughtfulness. The princess kept the umbrella as a reminder of the importance of showing kindness to others, regardless of circumstance or protocol. Years later, both James and Charlotte would remember that rainy day at Windsor Castle. For James, it represented the moment when he truly understood the human connection between those who serve and those they protect. For Charlotte, it was an early lesson in leadership through compassion, showing that even small acts of kindness can make a profound difference in someone's life. The story became part of Windsor Castle's informal history, a reminder that behind all the ceremony and tradition are real people deserving of kindness and consideration. Princess Charlotte's umbrella had provided more than just shelter from the rain. It had created a moment of genuine human connection that would be treasured by all who witnessed it.